Grateful. Oh, thank you. Hold on, let me move this. I'm so grateful we can be together at this time. It seems very auspicious as we are facing potentially, or it seems it's unfolding now, this storm of war in the Ukraine. I want to just say that, you know, our themes for this year are weaving around two memes, if you will, that are really important in our time. One is beloved community, a term that was brought into focus by the Reverend Martin Luther King. And the other is good trouble, a term that was used by Representative John Lewis. And part of the impulse to have this second year was that I had made so many friends online through this training that we did in year one. It really touched me to find myself in the lives of people literally all over the world who were doing very deep work, either individually or environmentally or socially, around issues related to suffering. And so we had this extraordinary suite of teachings over this past year, all of which are on the resource page, which brought into focus the background of socially engaged Buddhism, the foundations, contemplative, ethical, philosophical, conceptual, as well as practice, as well as through our wonderful faculty, areas of suffering in society and related to the environment that we wanted to explore. So, you know, as we were moving into conclusion and I was reading your projects, I was so moved. And I also realized that many of us had bonded either in our collegial groups or just through being online with each other for a whole year. And I thought, you know, let's move forward. Let's do a second year and let's shape it differently, because I know that people have so many commitments and being online is really demanding psychically, and also the time commitments are great. And let's do 4 micro trainings around conflict and conflict transformation, around the environment, around community development. And then finally, Cristiana Figueres, who is the architect of the Paris Climate Accord, and I will do the final training at the end of the year. And our collegial groups will continue intact, so those communities will stay intact, but at a less intense schedule and more discretionary, depending on what each of those micro community wants. Now, one of the things that I want to just say in preparation is I'd like us to keep these two foci, these two geographies that we're beginning to open up in mind as we're moving through these micro trainings. You know, what is a beloved community and what is good trouble? And how are you, each of you, manifesting this individually or also relationally? And I feel these are words from the Reverend Martin Luther King, and also his son reflected these words. You know, our goal is to create a beloved community. And this will require a qualitative change in our souls, according to Reverend King, as well as a quantitative change in our lives. And I think it's important to note that, excuse me, the actual term beloved community was coined by Josiah Royce, but it was Dr. King's vision in relation to the awakening of the Poor People's Campaign that signaled a very powerful transition of this notion of beloved community towards a multiracial coalition that is being created for economic justice. And I would suggest that both in our community here, but also in your communities, in your home, it's not only racial justice, economic justice, social justice, but it is as well environmental justice that we are dedicated to. And what is beloved community? It's a community where everyone is cared for, where there's an absence of poverty, where there's an absence of hunger, where there is understanding of difference, and where there's an absence of hate. And we know that Reverend King used this term in the course of his dedicated life in relation to his social activism. And faith was also an important part of his vision of beloved community. And though his faith was Christian, so whether we're a Jew, a Christian, a Buddhist, a non, whatever faith that we practice in terms of formal religion, I feel like the notion of faith in the goodness of humanity, faith in possibility is the faith that we are trying to awaken here in this community. And you know, Reverend King was clear, it's not just an insular community, beloved community, that is going to make transformation possible. He was clear that our work has to happen as well in the realms of law, in the realms of education, in relation to healthcare, and in relation to municipal reform. So let me just say a few things about John Lewis, Representative John Lewis. But before I do that, I just want to say, as we consider what is unfolding in Russia and in the Ukraine, our work together is about understanding the profound value of nonviolence. And that part of realizing nonviolence is to have the kind of psyche and heart and values that focuses on the experience of radical inclusiveness, so that we've got the maturity and the perspective to be compassionate stewards of the future. Now, some of us are more inclined toward getting into trouble. But John Lewis called this good trouble. And John Lewis devoted his life to racial justice, to equality. And he was clear that good trouble meant necessary trouble. And he made this statement on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, on March 1st, in 2 years ago, in 2020, where there was this phenomenal reimagining of what happened on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which happened in early March in 1965, where he was beaten horribly, almost to death. And that Sunday was called Bloody Sunday. And he said, do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. And this is so close to John Paul, what you teach. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It's the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. He also said, freedom is not a state, it is an act. It is not some enchanted garden perched high on a distant plateau where we can finally sit down and rest. He said, freedom is the continuous action we must all take. And each generation, that's our generation now, must do its part to create an even more fair and just society. I feel that these words as a way to lift us into this second year of our journey of learning and action together are so important. Because this is a time where we can explore the skills that are related to the cultivation of beloved community as a necessity. We cannot do this alone. We are a we. We do this with and through each other. It's also a time for us to really not lose courage, but to understand how important good trouble is, which means the value of courage, the value of compassionate action, and of moral character. So my hope for this year is that we forge deeper bonds with our Mahasangha and that we are able to explore and develop the skills needed at this time to realize beloved community. And beloved community, from our point of view, it's not just the two-leggeds. We're talking about all species and the value of the relationship between action and contemplation. So the first micro teaching we're going to be going through will be guided by our wonderful friend, John Paul Lederach. And I think most of you know John Paul is a senior fellow at Humanity United, and he draws upon his decades of experience in the area of conflict transformation. And he's internationally recognized for his pioneering work in the field of conciliation and conflict mediation. And he's provided mediation for peace-building efforts in Somalia, in Northern Ireland, in Colombia, 40 years, in the Basque Country, in the Philippines, Tajikistan, Nepal, and in both East and West Africa. And he's conflict transformation, mediation, and international peace building in 35 countries around the world. So I want to just say to all of us who are gathered here, for these training sessions, it will take commitment and discipline on our part because we're online. You know, if we were in the Zendo at Upaya, it would be, in a way, you have to travel far to get there, but you know, you're in the capture of our beautiful place. Well, you're in the capture of your bedroom, your office, your living room. But I hope you're in the capture of your commitment. So I urge you to please stay the course. And this session, which is 2.5 hours long, and we will have a break, it might conclude earlier. And this will be true for all of our sessions. But I wanted us to commit to enough time to be sure we can go deep into these micro trainings. And the shape of all these 4 sessions will include a short introduction and meditation that I will offer, followed by the training session and a kind of Q&A. Then we'll have an ENSO, where we will look at what we've learned from the point of view of where our attention and heart is in terms of our work, what we feel needs to be repaired in ourselves or in the world that we're endeavoring to serve, and what needs as well to be restored. And finally, what needs to be let go of. So John Paul, I just thank you with my whole heart for giving us this rare opportunity. As all of us are aware of the situation in the Ukraine, where war is looming and where confusion abounds. So my deep gratitude to you, but also to all of our friends who are gathered here at this time. Thank you, John Paul.
Thank you, Roshi. I'm assuming we're jumping in, or was there to be a short period of meditation?
I'm just taking a good breath.
Okay.
So Noah, I see that you're pinned. Is that right?
No.
No, okay, great. Good.
Maybe you pinned me.
There you are. Now I saw Noah's wonderful image on my computer, so I'm going to repin myself. Thank you.
I just have John Paul spotlighted.
Okay, great. So I would like to invite us to take a deep breath and let our attention rest on the sensation of the inhale, so we can get grounded, so we can be resourced, and on the exhale, drop into the body. And for a moment or two, kind of ask us to bring to mind a situation where suffering is present. And for me, my heart mind is really turning toward the Ukraine. And actually on the inhale, I ask you to breathe in what you might imagine a teenager near the frontier of that country might be experiencing right now. And on the exhale, send strength, send kindness, send love to that young person. And again, if you're choosing the situation of the Ukraine as the focus for the practice right now, breathing in what might be experienced by a young person. Near the border of the Ukraine. And let it really open your heart and mercy on the exhale. May you have courage. May you be grounded in the midst of all of this. As you sense war arriving in your country. And if the Ukraine is not what you can connect to at this time, maybe it's a family member who's struggling or a friend. For me, I also turn my heart mind to Paula Green, a great social activist who has lung cancer, who is going into hospice this very day. Breathing in that suffering that she is meeting and breathing out mercy. Great heart toward Paula. And for a few moments, sit with that person or situation where there's great vulnerability, and breathe in whatever they might be experiencing. Really let it open your heart. And on the exhale, let a blessing, the sense of presence, of great kindness, flow on the exhale toward this one or toward this situation. And let go of these so-called objects of contemplation, what you've given your attention to, and just rest in your inhale and your exhale. With the breath deep in the body. And for a moment, allow yourself to touch into gratefulness, the gratitude that arises when you consider our great fortune in being able to be together in this time, at this time. And that whatever benefit you experience in the practice or in the course of this training, may it be dedicated to the well-being of others. Thank you for your practice. John Paul, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Roshi, and greetings to all of you. I should just get a thumbs up, maybe from Noah, that you're hearing me okay. All right, good. This is a real privilege to have this opportunity to share the next 2 hours with you. The exercise that we're going to do, I have done in quite a number of locations and on different occasions, but I have never done it virtually. So the course of this past week, I've been talking with Roshi and Noah about how we might best set it up. And I guess we'll beg for mercy before we start. I'm sure there'll be a learning curve around pieces of this that could find a way to be done potentially better. The focus of this scenario that we're going to work with comes directly from experiences that I've had in locations of civil wars. So in its early iteration, it was in Central America, and at later points, I had similar experiences in Africa, where something that would appear as beneficial as health resources, a clinic for people who had very little access to that during periods of fighting, would itself become a source of great conflict. And so this scenario is a bit fictionalized. It could be Central America, it could be Africa, it could be, and I see my good friend Al on the screen, it could be just not far from here in Cochise County, where in the last couple of weeks, the Board of Supervisors for the county rejected something like $1.5 million of federal aid for healthcare when every system in the county is stretched. But their understanding was that that aid was coming in some way that would exacerbate or inappropriately be used for purposes that they didn't agree with in terms of its sourcing and in terms of its application. I would say almost literally, and I'm not sure who all is on this call from what country, but almost literally some of what we're looking at today in this fictionalized story could actually be unfolding where we live right now in our own counties. So take it for what it's worth in reference to how you may experience it in that regard. The purpose behind this approach is to lift forward both complexity and a deeper understanding of how we might develop capacities to hold deep tensions that simultaneously are unfolding and that often sit just beyond our control. One of the hardest things to learn about conflict is that you control very little, except for yourself and how you choose to show up and the teams that you may be engaged with. And this remains one of the challenges. I have come at this over the years from the perspective of conflict transformation. So a haiku version of conflict transformation in the next 2 minutes. We've posted some resources if you want to look at it a bit more. My deepest concern over the years was to help people continuously focus on the challenge of change, how change unfolds and how it can unfold toward exactly what Roshi was mentioning earlier, toward the greater sense of rehumanization and the common and collective good, and not toward things that diminish our humanity and lend themselves to increased violence and suffering. What I found in my training was that a lot of focus in my particular work came from the background in conflict resolution, which tended to move pretty quickly towards solutions to a particular problem. But I had also been equally raised and brought up through the deeper fields of nonviolence and nonviolent understanding, which has embedded within it both the ability to take notice of what needs to change, a willingness to step forward and at times raise up something that's not right, that creates what John Lewis calls that good trouble, and at the same time is deeply concerned for the humanity of even your enemies. So there is embedded with that, in that, an effort to continuously appeal to the potential for understanding, dialogue, and respect and dignity. So that holds both the capacity that at times conflict needs to be raised up, which feels like it's escalating. You're creating the trouble. And at times when conflict takes the form of deep violence, we are moved to try to de-escalate the violence, but not lose sight of the changes that are needed. So by using the word transformation, I was trying a both and approach. How do we hold those in tension, the ambiguities that come with it? And that the more I explored the changes, I saw that multifaceted thing that Roshi was just now mentioning. That change is about personal change. It's about change in the relationships, especially when there are deep power imbalances and exclusion. It's about change in the systems and the structures that we've created. And it's often about a deeper look at the cultures that we're embedded in and how they replicate over time certain patterns. So conflict transformation wants to look both at what the presenting problems are, but it also wants to look at the presenting and historic patterns that often have a long history. And typically within that, when you look at patterns that are less visible, you're going to find 2 or 3 or 4 things almost always present. One of those is some form by which people have had experiences of exclusion or power imbalances, and often conflict is about power balancing, how it's understood, how people are affected by it, who has access, who doesn't, whose voice matters, whose doesn't. It has a lot to do with identity, particularly as conflict intensifies. We all know this power of polarization that pulls us into us and them, good and bad. And identity will be deeply a part of what's happening. It will certainly have patterns of both good and not such great, if not absolutely complicated forms of communication. That polarization often drives us to not engage more directly with people that we fear or don't understand or that we see as threatening. And finally, it has, I think, this deeper pattern of how historic trauma expresses itself across generations. So the context we're looking at has a bit of all of that embedded in it. And we will certainly not exhaust it today. The methodology is one that I learned from the Paulo Freire School of Popular Education in Latin America, which is what was often referenced as a problem posing methodology. So you set up a situation, a context, a particular challenge, and then you gather around that and you converse about what is happening. So, and in that conversation, you begin to unfold layers of understanding, different viewpoints, part of the dilemmas, things that you're doing. And we're going to do that today in kind of a fishbowl fashion. So in the big picture of things, we're going to have a number of steps that unfold here. The first will be that just in a few minutes, we're going to ask for some volunteers to jump into the fishbowl. I guess you all will be the goldfish or the koi, who knows which image we may want to use. Those of you that will volunteer will be kind of live and more front and center for the rest of us that will be observing, but where each and every one of you will be asked to reflect on the challenges as you see them, the kind of thing that you might contribute, what questions you might ask, what suggestions you might make. Though the live conversation unfolding before us will be those who are in sort of the limelight, about 5 people. At that point, we will go back to looking at the presenting scenario, which we've sent out. Some of you may have read. I'm going to go back through it again because I'm assuming that maybe not everybody's had a chance to really digest it or look at it. I will probably add some flavor. My role as facilitator is flavor adder. I'm also kind of a provoker. I probably will be adding things as we go along that make the situation worse at different points. But that's the reality of unfolding conflict. So it's what I'm trying to do is to bring a dose of how these things actually unfold in real time. We can't fully simulate it, but we're going to try our best to go that direction. The actual structure of this is that once we start, I have a couple of assignments that we'll be looking at piece by piece over the course of an hour, hour and 15 minutes. Each assignment will ask the fishbowl to engage with things that are being talked about there, and they'll engage in a conversation. But as you're working on the assignment, I will also be introducing new information into the situation, which is what happens when you wake up every morning and read the newspaper. Something new has just popped up. And when you're in these situations, it's the popping up that becomes really interesting. Is it a crisis or is it an opportunity? Is it something that we don't want to happen, or is it something that hidden in what we don't want to happen offers something that we hadn't thought about? Those are the actual challenges of working with these situations as they unfold, whereas a case study can kind of look back and take apart what happened. We're going to try to do this one in the unfolding. And in that unfolding, what does it tell us about how we need to learn to show up in situations that are both ambiguous, complex, and yet contain the things that we most want to attend to, which is how better to respond to human suffering, how better to show up for the process of change, for the rehumanization of people in their communities. So with that in mind, I think I won't go much further, Noah, than to ask you and Roshi to help me with the setup first of the choice of our volunteers. So I'll turn it back over to you to see how we do that. And then I will come into presenting to all of us the scenario and the setup of the assignments.
Thanks, John Paul, so much. So I'm going to encourage you all to be brave, jump in. As many people as possible, raise your hand as a volunteer. Oh, good. We've got a few going here. Keep going. Come on, folks. It's going to be fun. Few more. Oh, goody. Thank you. And then in an unbiased way, I hope, just for the fun of it, a few more volunteers. Why not? Great. Super. Oh, this is wonderful. Okay. All right. So, John Paul, how many volunteers may I choose?
We were going to suggest 5. I know it's very few, but I think for the purpose of the conversation, 5 might be best.
So, let's see. As many of you know, we just day before yesterday opened this to people who haven't been in the formal training, but I'm going to have one of those people be a volunteer, and that's Blake. If Blake, if you don't mind, if we could spotlight Blake, and then how about Jenny Lacoste? If that's okay with you, Jenny, and Marina Colby, if you don't mind. Wonderful. And let's see. I'm
just trying to find Marina.
Marina's in there somewhere. We're going to have good gender balance, I hope. And Monica Son. So how many do we have now?
4.
4. Can we do this with 6 people so we can have fully, truly gender balance? Now,
from my end, sure, Roshi, that's great.
Okay, great. Boy, I'd like to have all of you in the gaggle. So we have Blake, Jenny, Marina, Monica, Tim Harrison. I think, yeah, Tim. Wonderful. It's so nice to see you in Atlanta, I think. So we have Atlanta, San Antonio, San Diego, New York, Washington, D.C. I think we need a European. And there we have Monica Winkelmann, our good friend from Germany. Yay.
Are you saying make Monica? I thought you were, yeah.
So we have 3 men and 3 women, or did I miscount? Oh, shoot. Monica, wait a minute.
We need one more. One more male.
Oh, one more male. Monica, wait, just forgive me. I'm gonna see just one more male. All right, let's see who else is. Jerry Simcock. Jerry, do you mind if
Here we go.
Yeah, Jerry,
Okay.
our friend from Scotland. Is this okay for you, Jerry? Great.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to lower all hands. So we've got our fishbowl. Now I'm going to add in John Paul. Where did he go?
And can you remove me?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Roshi. So John Paul, you have your fishbowl now. Everyone in the fishbowl, you're co-host, so you can go ahead and unmute when you want to speak.
Yes. Welcome, fellow goldfish. So I'm going to, and Noah, you maybe keep me on track if something doesn't appear to work quite right. I'm going to share my screen. Is it? I don't think it's shared yet. Is that right, Noah? We turned it off.
It's not shared yet, and yeah, I'm going to put in I'm going to put the links just so everyone knows. I'm going to put the links for the things that he's sharing into the chat. So you're welcome to also open them in the chat. In your browser, so you can follow along that way, or you can follow along with him here.
So each time that we add something new across the whole of all of you watching, you will also be able to open it by way of your chat link. Although I'll be putting it up here on the screen occasionally in order to walk through it so that you can, all of us can see the same thing. So this is the background that we sent out yesterday. And I'm going to try to go through this and give you a bit of explanation as I go. So you're welcome to just take note. There's a lot of little tiny things embedded here and there that give you some hints that may be useful at a later point. The background is that this is a faraway country that may feel very close to home. So it's just emerged. So we're looking at a setting where the country has come out, the overall nation has come out of 12 years of civil war. That means a peace agreement was signed and a ceasefire has been signed, and fighting groups that have been armed have stopped fighting in principle. And a transitional government is being set up to kind of conduct things for the nation for the next 2 years. In that process, what's common is that there's kind of this process of demobilizing former combatants, people that have been armed and fighting. But it's also true that people who have been displaced from their homes start to return. And in their return, they're coming back to places where they used to live, but it's been 12 years. And we're going to focus down not on the whole of the country, we're going to go to one province, one district, one county. I put it as a county in our explanation because it may be a little more familiar. It's a more localized place within a much bigger context. And in this county, it's called Mukigamba. And there are two main towns in Mukigamba, the town of Kwale and Buganda. So I've made a little map for you. So here's our map. And this relatively remote county has a main highway that comes through. And there are two towns that basically are the most well-known towns in the county. And they hold kind of the main markets where people would go to get food, get groceries. You can sort of imagine whatever's familiar to you. Historically, what's significant is that the town of Kwale has been more populated historically by the Lomoro group. And the Lomoro group, during the war, during the fighting, formed a liberation front known as the Lomoro Liberation Front, or the LLF. Down in Buganda, they pulled into their own, militia armed group as well, and they called it the KLF because most of them come from an identity group known as the Kigolo. So you have in this particular county, the LLF and the KLF, there are more roads than are shown in this map, but this is the main highway. This is the two main centers of commerce and resources. And these two folks, these two communities have had a lot of trouble during the war period. I'm going to downsize my map for a moment. You can find that in your chat link if you want to look at it more. But what I want to go on is to just say that while their liberation fronts fought the government forces, the worst fighting took place locally between them. And when I say that it took place locally, it means that there were a lot of harm was done. There were massacres. Each side can point to the other side as having committed atrocities. While these two villages are separate, we must note that before the war, before all this broke out 12 years ago, they actually seemed to get along pretty well. In fact, there was a history of intermarriages. There are connections that are crisscrossing between these two communities. But once the war started, people pulled back and entrenched or left if they felt too much under attack. So that fighting destroyed a very significant amount of the infrastructure. The schools have not been functioning well. The health services have mostly collapsed. The local administration office no longer function. And now we're in a situation where over the past few months, given the peace agreement and the ceasefire, refugees are starting to come back. Fighters are starting to come back to their hometowns. People want to start a new life. But fear, really deep pain, and animosities are still very present in the minds and hearts of most people. Peace may have been signed out there in Geneva in Europe by the big people, but down here in Mukigamba, stuff is hot and it's not easy. So just get a flavor for that. Now, our scenario is set up around the following, and Fishbowl people, this is where your assignment starts to come in. As part of the international support for a reconstruction after the war, a European Health Association has made the decision that they will put up the money to build one clinic in each county. They have made an assessment that health services are very much needed. They have been missing for the most part for the last decade. There is almost nobody anywhere in Mukigamba or in the country that would disagree with the fact that health services are needed. But while everybody agrees that health services are needed, there's not enough money to just go around randomly and build clinics everywhere. So they've decided they'll invest in one per county. And what they have come across is that they think that the county of Mukigamba, this health investment may create problems. So they have asked you, Fishbowl people, who are renowned for your conflict transformation capacities, to serve as a resource group that would travel down to Mukigamba and spend some time there and come back to the European Health Association with procedural recommendations. I want to emphasize the word procedural. You're not being asked to say exactly what the final solution is. You're being asked, how should they proceed? And they have some very specific things that they are interested in understanding or knowing about. They don't want these resources to be the source of renewed fighting. The last thing they want is for a health service coming in that would somehow create greater division. So what they're wanting to know is how to proceed so it will not increase the divisions and fighting. And they ask the very specific question, is there some way that these resources might in fact contribute to solidifying the peace, for improving relationships in this place where it is so difficult? Now, early on, it's very clear that the reason why this may create conflict is that where to put the clinic is a big challenge. it's to be a service for the whole of the county. But there are already some idle threats that if it's put in one part of the county or the other, it will be seen as being aligned with somebody, and that there are still these gangs of youth and former fighters who are now unemployed, but still have access to a lot of guns and ammunition. And they're sort of de facto in control of a lot of decisions. And because there's no real local administration that's established, it's not clear who you might go to make these decisions. So everybody is kind of reliant on the informal networks that exist. And at the same time, you have to navigate some security issues. So to revisit the exact assignment in the big picture, the European Health Association would like for you to have recommendations on how best to proceed to build a wider consensus around how this investment for the health clinic could bring health resources and at the same time not exacerbate the conflict. Now, I will say that Goldfish members in this fishbowl, none of you are from Mukigamba. None of you are Lamoto or Kigolo, okay? So you don't have to worry about whether you're personally connected. You're coming from outside, but you have a lot of knowledge and experience in other parts of the country. Now, for the purpose of our exercise, I just want to make note of this. Over the next roughly 50 minutes to an hour, about every 10 minutes will represent a couple of weeks. So things are going to hop right along once we start this. So you have to imagine that as we unfold the process, every 10 minutes or so is going to be a week or two. And at different points in your deliberations as a group, I will be coming in to give you assignment 1, 2, and 3 so that you have some process of things that I'd like you to look at. But also while you're in the middle of talking, I'm going to interrupt you. And I'm going to do it with a little singing bowl. You know this sound quite well. You can pretend that's the rough equivalent to somebody knocking on your door. And literally, because you're located in a small county, people actually walk up and knock on your door. So there'll be stuff coming in to you, and you as a group will have to bring in what the information is and decide what to do with that. So if we could, I'm going to downsize this, and I'm going to bring up assignment number 1. And this assignment, I'm going to have you open your conversation around 2 pieces. I want you to imagine that your group has now gathered and you're getting ready to travel to Mukigamba. You haven't left yet, you're getting ready to travel, but you're having your first meetings. And there's 2 things I'd like you to talk briefly about, just whatever ideas you have. The first is, just from what you know so far, who would you like to talk to? Who do you think it might be important to figure out if they're there, if something does exist? Obviously, you're from kind of a health background. So what might be the logical things that you would be asking people about? Who are the priority people you want to meet? Just some ideas on that. And the second one is, time is going fast, and you're going to arrive in Mukigamba. And I can guarantee you this, I don't care where you put your foot. I don't care where you put your foot. Wherever that first foot arrives, somebody's going to say, why did you talk to them first? So what do you do around this question of wanting to develop trust and wanting to avoid being seen as if you're coming in to only benefit one side? So there are people you want to meet. How are you going to do that in a way that doesn't already, create problems for how people perceive you and the trust they have in you? Those are the 2 things I'd like for you to talk. I'm going to leave this up because you may have questions. If we can go, I'm going to downsize it here a bit. You can bring that one in, Noah, for people to have on the side in their chat on their computers. If we went back to the fishbowl for a moment, do I need to stop share to do that, Noah?
Yeah, and we might have lost the fishbowl. Yeah, Looks like the fishbowl got lost. We're gonna have to redo it. So everybody who's co-host
so
now,
we can see them.
Please don't remove your screen. So okay, I'm gonna re-spotlight everyone. Hold on a second.
Now I think I'm still live. So while I'm waiting for people, I'm going to say to my fellow Goldfish members, I'm here. If you have questions, I will tell you right now, I don't have all the answers. So you may ask me questions I can't answer, and I may kick it right back to you, but you may have, you know, issues of clarification that you want to ask. But your assignment is that the 5 or 6 of you should just converse among each other. I'm suggesting your starting point as you're sitting in the airport together, getting ready to board a flight down to Mukigamba. Who do you think you want to talk to first? What are the priorities? And what are you going to do about this challenge of no matter where you land, you're going to be with somebody first? And how is that going to create a perception of you guys? So onwards. I'll interrupt when I'm ready to add the next assignment or some other stuff. So please proceed. I'm going to be on mute till you ask me to say something.
I have one question to begin with, and that is, how big are these cities or towns?
It's a rural county. So you know it's a rural county. They're relatively small. Relatively small. You can imagine any rural county, rural area around where you live and the size of towns that you might navigate if you were there. So it's certainly not New York City, Washington, D.C., or Geneva.
And are we all outsiders, all in the fishbowl?
All outsiders from Mukigamba.
Okay.
Is there an identified leadership structure in this town that is well known so far?
I don't know. I guess you'd have to find that out. Who would you like to talk to, Jenny?
Well, I guess I would want to know, you know, is this, you know, what, I guess, is this more of a traditional, you know, where we're mixing kind of tribal versus county things? Is this more of a tribal culture? What's the historical cultural context of this community is probably the first thing I would ask from a structure standpoint.
Yeah, it's a great question.
And I would like us to do some of our own homework before getting on the plane or arriving. I mean, really to understand better the historical, political, economic context behind the conflict. Also, we're apparently representing a European health center. I'm curious about which particular country or countries. Is there colonial history related to this European country or context that we should be well aware of as we're getting prepared to travel? And so just doing our own homework around the, you know, this sort of political economy analysis, historical analysis, better understanding the nature of the conflict. There was apparently peace in the past. Why, you know, what were the drivers behind this current conflict? I'd love to learn more about the, you know, the power structure, the current political situation, the communication. Was there an othering, you know, propaganda between the way communication was used to pit one community against the other community? So I have a whole list of background questions I would like us to be prepared for before we even think about traveling to the country.
Your plane flight might be full of reading then, Marina. Is your inclination, I'm just going to keep provoking here a bit. Is your inclination toward the interest in the political structure mean you'd like to find politicians to talk to first?
Well, I would like to know a little bit more about the current government, who the players are. You know,
so the instructions indicate that there is none. it's been destroyed. In this county, everything is pretty much gone that used to be in terms of local administration.
Right.
So just,
yeah. And then is this a humanitarian situation still? I mean,
yes.
is there, so is
there isn't a single person that disagrees that the humanitarian crisis isn't massive for an otherwise very impoverished county.
Right. So maybe we could also consider the health needs through the humanitarian assistance approach before thinking about setting up a new center. So there's a lot of that background context that I think we need to discuss within the fishbowl before we even consider plopping, you know, a new center in this county.
So just a small reminder, the plane has left and you're probably landing in about 30 minutes.
Okay.
Any suggestions on how exactly you're going to make your first step? Who might you, Jerry.
So we're on the plane. We haven't got a clue what's happening apart from the information you've given us. It seems absolutely a mess, disaster, but we do have some hope there in terms of delivering a health center, hopefully, that won't get destroyed or mixed up. And my inclination would be to, first of all, check out if there are any other health workers or people working in health within the two towns. So they'd be one point of contact. Any of the leadership figures in the two liberation groups, I'd be really interested in talking to. And local mayors. Really, the dangerous thing to me is that there are so many people running around with so little, but with arms. And I find that kind of a frightening prospect. My inclination certainly wouldn't be to build a centre in either of the two towns, but outside of both, and to invite people in. I don't know what people think of that, but before doing anything like that, I would like to bring a circle of people together to see if there is any chance of getting people from the two factions, as it were, to talk and to share and maybe to grieve together or whatever. I think you've got to do that fundamental work before you can do anything else, just to test the water and see if there is any possibility of that. So that's my thoughts.
Okay, I'm going to shift this just for the purpose, because your conversation actually went to assignment 2. No, if you could post that, if people wanted to bring it up, we wouldn't have to lose the fishbowl every time. So I'm going to read through assignment 2 because it actually is some of what you're attending to already, which is that basically you are now pretty much in Mukigamba and you're talking about what is the information you need. Jerry's suggestions were asking people initially about potential health care resources that may exist. You were asking about who the leadership is, if it's moved away from formal administration, how are we to be in touch with what does exist? Those are great questions. I think Jenny, Marina, I mean, you were asking about information gaps, and you were starting to identify a few of those. So because I don't want to lose sight of it, I'm going to start in now on letting you see the second assignment sheet, but also to encourage you to have a quick discussion about how you're going to deal with the question of trust. To your one comment, you are being seen as coming from outside. That's 100% clear. Is there a colonial history? Comes with the question, is there anywhere in the world that there isn't? And when conflicts are nasty, people have colonial eyes pasted everywhere. So yes, there's no avoiding that you're coming from outside, and who knows how you'll be seen. So it's just maybe a minute or two or a half dozen around how are you as a group going to proceed to even have your early conversations?
I want to jump in. I think that finding the folks who are the trusted leaders of the, both places. And I'm thinking about when, you talked contextually that the leadership has fizzled out, but I'm going with just some wisdom, that there are folks who have filled in gaps for those who have suffered. So maybe those are spiritual leaders or some kinds of healers that have addressed suffering for those who have lost, or that folks from the communities have gone to. And that, my first thought was talking to folks who were most impacted, but then it was like, how do you determine that? But there have to be folks who know what the suffering is and can speak to that, and also folks who protect those who have suffered. So I think it would be really important to connect with those folks and build a relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's exactly, that makes so much sense. I'm trying to think, how do we embed ourselves as human beings in a way that we begin to learn who are these trusted people? When we show up, it seems to me, whoever sees us is going to be suspicious on the one hand, but also eager to align with us and take advantage of whatever we have to offer. Mm-hmm. What if 3 of us go to Kwale, 3 go to Buganda, and we spend a week or 2 in each aligning ourselves half and half with these different military leaders, if there's a religion or,
Oh.
Oh, sorry, Tam, there's a knock at your door. That was an excellent suggestion, but you have now landed and you're in Mukigamba. I won't say where you're at because that would have been up to you to where your first hostel night might have been, HOSTAL. But new information coming in, and I will read it to you. It's on the chat line. There's a young boy at your door who is knocking, and he's carrying a handwritten note. Apparently, a local militia commander has heard that you have arrived and that you're developing a proposal for a clinic in Mukigamba. And this commander was actively involved in the Lamordo Liberation Front and is from the village of Kwale. And he is known on the streets as Chuck Norris II. And the note says, so this is the handwritten note that this commander, Chuck Norris II, wrote you, sirs.
Sirs.
Sirs. Most definitely, sirs. I understand you are developing a proposal for a new health clinic in Mukigamba. I am pleased to provide you help in locating the ideal building site in Kwale. It is the most appropriate access point for the whole province. We can assure security for you, the health personnel, and anyone who will come to the clinic. I have heard that you may be considering a site in Buganda. Be aware that this will be seen as a provocation to the people of Kwale. Please respect our efforts to rebuild and use proper channels. And he signs it, B.D. Harrison, Acting Mayor, City of Kwale. Acting Mayor, City of Kwale. So back to you, Tim, on how you might decide to move your 2 groups. But I will ask, what do you do with this request to meet with you from the acting mayor of one of the towns?
So let's sneak out. 3 of us get over to Uganda and let him know that 3 of us want to meet right away. How about that? What do y'all think, team?
Well, I don't feel prepared, ready to discuss the development of a center yet, any place. We know that there are health needs and resources, but I think we need to do some more on the ground communication and work. I would love to meet with, back in my network of international women's human rights activists, I have some contacts here from a women's peace and security network that I would love to meet with, to hear from just how the women are doing in these communities. And just keep it open-ended from there. But I don't think, I'm not ready to discuss the building of a physical center yet.
So should we write to Mayor Harrison and let him know we're just not ready to talk to him yet?
I think.
Go ahead, Mike.
Sorry. Yeah, I think it's a line of communication that's opened. And that's quite valuable, although what he seems to be implying is not so good. So I would like to keep the communication there. So a polite response thanking him for the information might be a good way to start, but saying that we're at very, very early stages. And we will be looking for more information. And maybe to sort of butter him up a bit by congratulating him on some of the things he's done. So keep it friendly and open, but don't agree to anything. Would be one way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, get into the other town, find the equivalent, or find someone similar. And I mean, I suppose we've got to find somewhere to pitch our tent.
I think
where are we going to pitch it?
We're in a hostel. Oh, you mean psychologically pitch it?
Well, no, I just mean between the two places. Are we in one or the other of those places, or are we going to try and stay outside of those places for the time being?
I think it would be important to make clear to this acting mayor that you're going to only proceed in an inclusive manner that includes everyone with an interest and probably a very inclusive group of people. And that while you're interested in his proposal, you're going to proceed in a very inclusive fashion.
Yeah.
We seems like we need to get out in this community and be proactive. We've got to start meeting people, get the lay of the land. We know so little, So maybe to let him know that we're meeting with people in both towns. I don't know. What do you all think about this splitting up idea and aligning ourselves, letting them align us as belonging to them? And then we become kind of proxies. We've got to get people's trust or nothing. This is never going to work. So
I think rather than dividing our group, it might, because that would signal that those particular people are on one side or another, that maybe a way of proceeding would be to call a big general meeting that was created a big tent where you could speak to everyone at once and lay out a manner of proceeding rather than letting these particular people dictate how they want to proceed.
Hold that thought for just a minute. It's a good one, Blake, about a potential avenue, but I want to shift over for a moment to assignment 3, which Noah will post, just so that we add one more element into what you're working with. So I would encourage at some point, if you have opportunity to do so, just from what you're starting to feel already about what's going on and what you've read and heard, what kind of change processes seem to be needed in this place. I list in the assignment thing here, you can think about it narrow or big. There's some idle youth and unemployment, and there's a security nightmare going on. What you were talking just now, I think about a proposal for a community-wide, there's a need for dialogue. What kind of change processes are you just in the back of your head, you're thinking, boy, this is not just a mess, but there's some stuff here that needs to change. What might be a few of those?
Community, cohesion. I mean, after conflict, people are struggling, right, for survival. What about income generation? What about, their local livelihoods? I think that's always an entry point in terms of people, women, mothers interested in supporting their children, keeping their children fed. These are, I think, areas for potential communication for us to learn more and build trusted relationships, while not trying to design these solutions outside of these communities. We really need to listen to what the communities really need. We're just outsiders right now. Nothing's going to be sustainable if it's not locally led and designed.
I also think I'm feeling like this is a lot, and I would like for us to just pause and take a few breaths, because I'm feeling like this is a lot and everything keeps changing every couple of weeks. And I feel like there has to be a process with us amongst ourselves. Like, what do we value as a group that's going here before we even begin to listen to all of this, horrible stuff. I mean, I think this is horrible stuff, and that's definitely impacting me. I don't know if it's impacting you. I also think that before people begin to think about what's next, talking about the grief and talking about what was lost, and having an opportunity for other people, like, we're going in there to hear about this and we have to be prepared. So I'm also thinking about, like, what are we doing to prepare to sit with all of this? So I would like for us to just practice taking a few pauses as we sit with all of this stuff.
Thank you.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I kind of want to, I love the pause. I kind of want to just go to a place where local people gather outside of the power structure, the formal power structures that exist, and see what people are saying. Because I think you'll get many different perspectives that way. The local pub, so to speak.
Yes, Jenny, sorry to interrupt the pause for just a moment. I just wanted to add in one bit that you've been carrying a little radio with you, and just all of a sudden across the wires came an announcement. So a new bit of information here, information 2 for Noah. You're getting a phone call that apparently there's been an announcement. You get this from another friend at an NGO that you had connections to. I think one of the Monica's mentioned that you have some informal networks that you come in that you already know. She informs you that an assessment team from USAID, that's the aid and development arm of the US government, just came by her office and showed her a plan for an inoculation program and the delivery of medicines into Mukigamba. And apparently there's a team of US doctors that are going to be placed for 1 month to provide primary health care in the county. And they will be arriving next week. So the news is there's a group of doctors coming in with some medicines, and they're going to try to inoculate the county. They're arriving next week. I'll let you go back to your discussion. Sorry, Jennifer, to have interrupted there.
I would just quickly say this loops back to what I was talking about the local humanitarian assistance. like what sort of humanitarian assistance is being provided, and is there a way to inform the provision of that humanitarian assistance? Well, maybe we're not even in a position to inform that. We're in a position to learn from that. Maybe use some of those connections.
If I could go back to the idea of a generalized meeting, this inoculation could be announced at that meeting, but also there could be it would be an opportunity to establish ground rules for how you were going to proceed, and you could in the course of those ground rules, create dialogue, create, try to find out the relationships that are working within the communities. And you could attempt to establish some ground rules that there would be no, there'd be disarmament, there would be a pause in any fighting, and you would have to get each of the groups, including the gangs and militias or whatever, to agree to these ground rules as a condition of proceeding.
I'm not sure if I want to condition humanitarian assistance on ground rules for our center, but I do think that we can learn from these USAID, the program, or the assistance coming in. An inoculation program, we could have access to some of the women, and I'd love to have some conversations with them, sort of open-ended conversations, just to learn more about what's happening in their communities and what they think their needs are now for health services, or how to proceed as outsiders within their communities.
I'm just wondering where we are now in terms of, we've been there quite a while. Have we already made some contacts? Have we already contacted those women's groups, militia leaders, mayors? Have we had some conversations with them that are fairly open? And with these new guys coming in to offer the inoculation, whether we have established ourselves somewhere where we can bring people together. Because I think, although the first steps obviously would be to make contact and to try and be present with people in both areas, we also need to establish ourselves as slightly separate from all of that. And
Terry, I appreciate the input. It's very helpful because it leads to assignment 4. So maybe I'll just put up assignment 4, because you have been in Mukigamba for the better part of a month now.
right.
And obviously you have had conversations, and we'll take you seriously that maybe your team spread and talked to a variety of people.
Okay.
So this first little schema, if you see it, if you can bring it up, assignment 4 on the chat. It just is listing out some things that you actually been talking about, but I wonder if you could just take note of them. Some of it is about health resources and goals that you have. And then there's a highlighted and. Some of it is about not escalating or solidifying peace goals. So for example, maybe those doctors coming in are circulating, they're a resource. I think you mentioned, I'm just going to put in a few so it gives you an opportunity to reflect on what you've been saying. Some of you made mention that maybe we shouldn't carry the image of a physical building around in our heads. We should keep it open to think about how resources could be done differently than a building, for example. On the other side, solidify peace goals or escalate. Just now, a few of you were mentioning a couple of those that I was jotting down about some of your, how to be inclusive, how to, potentially bring in more people that don't normally get to have a voice in all of this? So what people are already have certain relationships of trust. Who are they? How do we bring them more to the fore? You were talking about dialogue. So what's your sense of how you see a kind of, in reference to goals, your thoughts about what's shaping up there in terms of this first little schema of health and peace building?
I'm just thinking about the prior situation with the inoculations, and do we really understand what kind of health interventions are welcomed here? And are we creating more harm when we're bringing in something that we think is going to be helpful when we haven't fully understood that yet? So I think as we consider what might be health interventions and what might be beneficial to both communities, we can't really, one of the recommendations should be is really understanding the contextual social historical practices of both communities, but also what are the practices that continue to recreate trauma when we think about the trauma that's already there. And I also want to add that we also should lift up the pieces of resilience or the pieces of wisdom that folks already have. So they're going to be those things within those communities. So really lifting those things up and including them in what these procedural recommendations should be.
I would like to think by now we've found out what sorts of traditions and practices and cultural rituals bind these two cities together that used to be so friendly with each other. And maybe we've supported a kind of some gatherings that are just about bringing the elders and kind of experiencing those. And maybe we've found some examples of marriages that have been torn apart or challenged during the Civil War, but now it's over. These people can come together and people can see that as a positive, I don't know, some way of putting that stuff out there as to see the benefits. But I hear the bell.
I know the Tibetan bull has never been more annoying. But let me say, you just got another knock on your door, and exactly, Tim, what you're talking about has come back to speak to you. At your door is an elderly, very respected woman from Buganda. And you can find this under New Information 3 that Noah will post. This is a woman who you met in your early consultations precisely because a couple of you, Jenny, Monica, and others said that you wanted to meet with local people and there were women's networks. So one of these women has come back and she is telling you, she's quite agitated, by the way, because she's reporting that last night fighting broke out just outside of Kuala. And the story that's been picked up so far is that there's a contested piece of land between several families. So that prior to the war, there was a family that had a house and some land, and they fled during the war period, and now they've come back. But during the 12 years they were gone, this piece of land and the house was taken over by a Lomoro family who's actually quite close to the LLF. And so when, you know, the family came back, they asked for their house back. And in the back and forth that they had at that moment, 2 people died. Both of them came from the displaced family. It all happened last night. And now rumors are going rampant across the county. And this woman who is quite agitated is at your door, and she is saying that she has some connection to the Kigolo youth and that those youth are pressing for retaliation. She is fearful that this is going to escalate into large-scale fighting again. And she's begging you as a team to please come talk to the youth before the shooting starts. How do you respond to her?
That's a really hard question.
Yeah.
I guess I would reflect back with another question. Who has been playing a large role in maintaining this delicate peace that, you know, the youth resonate with, I guess, that could serve as a guide on that? And I know there's not an answer to that question, but I'll ask it anyway.
Well, these are questions we could be asking her, right? Reflection questions for her. Why would she believe that us as outsiders, you know, what sort of authority does she believe we would bring to such a conversation? Or maybe not even authority, but just what she would expect from us and why.
Yeah. My initial reaction is to try and is to get in there. The second reaction is no, not now. My other thoughts are, do any of us speak any of these languages? Do any of us really know that much? And putting ourselves in a situation possibly where we don't know these languages very well, and where our culture is very, very different to theirs, it is difficult. And I take your point. I think talk back to the woman who has come. Find out if who she knows, who has been working for peace, and then to work with them. But of course, in these situations, things fly. You know, it can easily erupt. And in a way, when you're in those kind of situations, you know, these things happen rapidly, and they are beyond your control. So you do what you can.
Yeah, I like to say to Monica's point, maybe it's a good time to pause and see that this is evidence that we've earned the trust of important people in the community who are coming to us, not about the health clinic, but about the conflicts. I think we've done well. You know, we don't want to, we could try to get in and solve this particular incident, but I think asking her what we can do and hearing from her, you know, what she thinks, how we could influence, could inform our next steps.
And are there opportunities that bring these communities together, maybe through, you know, some, you know, whatever sort of traditions or rituals or festivals or feasts, you know, anything, you know, food brings people together, music brings people together.
Stories of forgiveness that are part of their culture.
Yeah, I think the presence of us to her is a lot. And I also, I'm not sure what we could do. I'm not sure that, you know, talking to youth would contribute to anything, but I think I would feel like we've done a lot if we just show up to whatever, you know, she needs us to hear.
This particular ring is actually a phone call, and this phone call will conclude our simulation. So the phone call, it's very hard to hear, but let me pick somebody. Monica, was that you talking?
Yes.
Oh, Monica, this is John Paul. I'm calling from Brussels. Monica, can you hear me?
I can't hear you. No,
you're breaking up, but I need to pass your team on some quick information. Can you hear me, Monica?
Yes, give it to me. I'm writing it down.
Okay. Very good. The EU just met and said the money has to be spent by the end of the month or we lose it. Can you please pass on
the end of the month?
By the end of the month, yes. If it's not spent by the end of the month, we're going to lose it. Could you please pass your recommendation so we have something to give to them? Monica, can you hear me?
When do you need the recommendations?
By the end of the month.
I got it.
Okay, thank you very much. and we'll stop there. First, let me give a very warm thank you to our fishbowl goldfish. You were brilliant. This simulation is really set up to be a case study in misery because it comes at you hard and fast, and it's part of the purpose. But Roshi and Noah, I think I might recommend that we just take a short break, or should we just plow ahead? I don't quite know. It's been a while since people have had time to breathe here. Any thoughts?
This was great. You know, I wanted to interrupt everybody. But I think in a way, I think we should just take a stretch where we are, unless you have to go to the toilet. Yeah. Because often breaks dissipate things. So if you have to go to the toilet.
3 to 5 minutes max, maybe 3 minutes.
Go. And let's just stretch where we are to the extent that we can. That's great too. And boy, I'm glad my sound was off, John Paul. I was just going, Wendy sitting next to me. I was just, you know, I wanted to interrupt.
Yeah. Well, no, I think when people are back, what I'd like to do is maybe add Roshi in to the circle. But I would like to have a real quick go around with a couple of short questions for the fishbowl people. Because
okay, we're going to bring the fishbowl back. Okay.
So yeah, then we'll start there, and then we can just move to a wider format so that others can participate.
Yeah, I think it'd be great. I'm sure that there are other questions that are brewing.
Yeah.
This was very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it's very. All my bad habits showed up.
Well, we all have.
I have an idea. Wait a minute.
Yeah. So maybe give me a signal when we're ready to start, and I guess I'll wait till I see the faces of the fishbowl folks that are back.
Great.
So Jerry and Marina, and then we'll jump in.
Let me encourage those of you behind your computer who are still on to, even if you remain sitting, stretch, breathe, smile, pause, much as Monica recommended. And that was fun. Wow. It's a very good team, I felt.
No, absolutely.
Would you want to travel with that group somewhere?
They would be terrific.
Yeah, that's what I felt too.
I have a feeling that we would have trouble getting people to agree to go to sleep for a while. This was going to be a hopping conversation. Maybe I'll jump in just because I know I want to give ample time for a wider participation. I've asked for our goldfish to hang around for a moment because I did have 1 or 2 questions that go more to your immediate experience of this, just to not lose track of it, your own awareness. So what was happening for you individually, just in terms of how it was impacting the embodiment of the moment? When you're in a situation where you have something you feel can be offered, you aren't quite sure how to move on it, but then stuff keeps happening. What was kind of the predominant feelings that you were experiencing?
I felt worried about, I felt very worried.
Anxious?
And worried about making something worse rather than better in something that's very loosely stitched together. Yeah. And who am I as an outsider to come in and, you know, be the person who says, okay, let's go, you know?
Yeah, that famous of all oaths do no harm kind of jumps up and stares you in the face. And at the same time, harm is unfolding all the time. And so you're kind of drawn to it. Others around the circle?
I would say being cautious, and then also the need to stay very grounded, just very grounded. Cautious and going with the flow, and always that do no harm principle as a guide, but also wanting to help. So trying to find that balance.
Yeah. It's so interesting because what you just lifted is a deep paradox, and it's embracing the paradox, not forming it as a contradiction. Grounded and fluid. It's like very adaptable, very grounded. That's not easy, but I think, you know, among other things, it's particularly why the commitment to practice and the commitment to lessening suffering form always this paradox. You know, it's so maybe one more, and then I'll go to a second question I wanted to ask, and then we'll open it up a bit wider.
I saw and felt flashes of my own stuff, like my own trauma stuff. And I'm
Yes.
like, wait a second, this is not about me. You know, this is not happening to me right now. Like I'm doing something here, but this is not what I'm doing. So that's why the pause is really helpful to me. Just the breathing coming back into the body, because it reminds me, okay, like, you know, this is not happening to me. So that reminder is very helpful, because my heart was racing and my palms were sweaty.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, you know, parenthetically, is why Roshi's grace word is so powerful. Those first two are exactly, Monica, I think what you were, if I have the right name. Yeah, Monica, what you were. Gather attention, recall intention. Just in a breath, that those two things can have a small capacity to do that, because it comes fast and furious in the middle of some of this. So a second question, maybe just open to anyone that hasn't spoken yet. What was your experience of all my interruptions? What did you notice with the interruptions? What did you notice about yourself, but also about what happened in the conversation with the group? What did the interruptions do to the group focus?
I think for me, you had kind of primed us for this, that the interruptions might seem bad, but there might be opportunities to there. But that was my experience. I think my kind of engineering background made me really want to focus on what can we do, what's practical here. And sometimes the group seemed to wander to kind of big ideas about, oh, maybe, and then this thing would happen. And be like, okay, now we can respond to that. Gives us something to work with. So there was actually kind of a relief sometimes.
Interesting. That's great. Yeah. Jerry or Blake?
I think, like you're saying, I think they offered openings, but also worries and fears and threats in some ways. You know, but you are kind of keen to grab onto something that might show you a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Blake, you want to add something?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It gives you a new opportunity to change the status quo.
I can't do it now.
Yeah. So and you're exactly right. I did prime you a bit that some of that was coming. You all have had a greater capacity to do both and than is sometimes, and maybe if we went longer, you would find yourself slipping toward the binaries of either or. But you know, a commander shows up, and what happens to the group conversation is that in the 45 or 50 minutes we have, a lot of focus goes to, you know, 5 or 8 minutes, maybe even, to that particular thing that just now showed up. And the question is, how do we keep a sense of the big picture while we're responding to the immediate thing? And I think you rightly noticed the kind of a both and, well, this may be an opportunity. Let's not lose sight of it. It gives us a connection, but let's not let him control the process. That's an interesting clarity of both and, but principled. So you had some guiding principles that were kind of underpinning this. But it's not atypical in these situations where every day there is, what I find is that a lot of people will say, once this crisis ends, we'll get on to the significant work. But if we don't take care of this, nothing else will be possible. And I actually find that a kind of a false way of setting up the challenge, because you are living in a permanently emerging crisis. That's what the notion of impermanence in some ways means. It's there will never be a day that something of significance does not interrupt your day in a lot of these contexts. So how to hold the space for being responsive while also being principled and vision driven is part of what that was trying to illustrate. I'm happy to open this up. Roshi, you may have one or two things. I wanted to go back and lift out one thing before we go just a little bit wider. I noticed that there were a number of things that had we had more of an opportunity prior to your going, you may have logically landed on. So your impulses, I think, were correct on the peace building side. And I just wanted to highlight those because they are very significant. When I was asking who you want to talk to without telling you much of that, I was interested in knowing whether people who control power and guns will be those who control decisions and power. And that is very significant in a lot of this. So how to have the principles that you were trying to highlight, and almost across all five of you, how to be clear about a wider participation, more inclusive, how to talk to people that may already have trust, how to locate resources of people that have some sense of what's going on in health, how to lift forward voices that aren't always included. These are all kind of that expansive process where you're not tied to what may informally or formally exist of what should or should not be done. The second is, this was intentionally, and I pushed on it through information and interruptions, intentionally trying to get you to shift to a solution that somebody else thought about that was probably not appropriate for the context. And that is the notion that we're coming here to build a clinic, quotes unquote. That's a solution to a problem that nobody's actually had a chance to talk about yet. So what I heard you doing, which I think is very good, combines health and peace, was you're taking a step back from a preconceived solution or form to recognize that there is need and potential for resources, but it's open as to how it might best be employed. That, a lot of what we deal with is that people have a pretty clear sense of what other people's solution is. And I think what you were demonstrating was an ability, even in those 40 or 50 minutes, to kind of hold off from jumping too far, even from the mandate that you were given. And it is a tension that we experience a lot about external mandates and internal grounded realities, which may be, Monica, where some of your trauma points were being triggered. Now you're a part of a team. I don't want to fall into those patterns. How do we do this? Well, I think there is this ability to live with some ambiguity of knowing that there is availability of things, but not having a pre-designed, prefabricated solution that you're trying to get people to buy into. That's a constant tension in a lot of these settings. Roshi, should we go to Enzo more widely? I assume you may want to say a few things.
I just want to mention a few things.
Absolutely. No, we can maybe expand this out further in case there are other questions and comments that come later. I'll mute.
No, I'd like to move to, an open exchange, but I just want to remember one of the most important teachings in year one, and those are the 3 tenets. How do we sit in this complex situation with so much pulling on us with not knowing? How do we actually let ourselves relax into the uncertainty and not be driven, as so many of us are, toward a solution, but to use in a way what Monica was saying, to take the pause, to drop down, to look at how quickly we're looking at a strategy or an outcome, even an outcome of peace or a clinic. So resting with not knowing. The second tenet in the 3 tenets of the peacemaker order that we studied, bearing witness, which is something that all of you spoke to. How do you bear witness? For me, it was beautifully articulated by a number of you. You know, really listening to the kid delivering the message, to the older woman going into town. How do you bear witness without feeling as though you need to have a reason to bear witness? But Jenny, I like you said, go to the local pub, you know, see where, you know, how people worship and join them in their worship, not separating yourself from the cultural context, but allowing yourself to embed, someone mentioned that, in the cultural context. So not knowing and bearing witness, you know, both I feel are processes that are so important in the work that we're doing. And then we're working with this notion of beloved community. So, you know, yes, there is self and other here. We're coming from outside. Yes, there is inevitably a history of colonialism that has undermined the possibility for genuine trust. How do you respond in a way from the point of view of bearing witness, not separating yourself from the context, but realizing actually, I feel, and Monica is so interesting, you said, you know, you got upregulated because maybe there's some things in your background or things that have happened, you know, in the Dominican Republic that are not dissimilar. You know, how do you bear witness, not as a colonialist, not as an outsider, but where you feel as though you're a stakeholder, not in the outcome that's being called to be made, like where to put the clinic, but in the genuine well-being of all the stakeholders, of all of the people involved in the process. And then we know that the third phase, or the third tenet, is of compassionate action, of loving action. So I just want to recall the 3 tenets, you know, as an MO, a modus operandi for us working, you know, in the field of peace transformation.
Excellent. Noah, I see that hands are coming. Maybe we enter into the Enzo more widely. Roshi and Noah, maybe you can guide that. Toward the end, I may have another comment or two just listening in. So great. I'll leave it in your hands for now.
But I also want, John Paul, I want to thank you, but I want to thank our 6 friends who really exemplified so many of the principles that we explored in this past year. So I'm
absolutely, it was grateful. Brilliant, brilliant.
So Noah, can you?
Yeah. So you want me to start calling on people?
Yeah.
Kelly.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, thank you for that. I was anxious the whole entire time as I was witnessing what was going on. And I could not get beyond what felt to me this kernel that you're getting at, John Paul, that you kind of added, which was like we are outsiders. This is the Europeans who have decided this on behalf of, and we are simply, pushing forward a decision that's made from the outside. So I couldn't quite get over the fact that I am just trying to convince. I'm trying to implement a decision that, you know, I'm distrusting of. Who says it's one clinic? Who says it's not 2 clinics? Who says it's not 10 small clinics operated by the elders of the communities? Who says? So I couldn't get past that in a lot of the discussions that we're having around the minutia, although you know, what do we do with imperfect information? What do we do with constantly changing dynamics and inputs? And, you know, how do we weather that as outsiders? But I wonder if you can just sort of, it's a big, big, big question for me. What is our role really as outsiders of that community to tell that community what should be done? And so how do we bear witness if in fact we are trying to impose a solution? I couldn't quite get over that. There's my statement.
You know,
That's
Kelly,
great,
if I
Kelly.
can turn it back to you and then John Paul, I'm just curious, what do you see?
I see it fraught. I see the exercise of it being a European entity who is coming into a war-torn, you know, local, you know, no doubt, you know, centuries old, you know, ways of being and relating in community with wisdom and process and systems that are not European, right? There was everything about the exercise was, you know, European and other, European as sort of the default, and like us getting what we wanted in community. And so that would feel like a situation that personally I would not want to participate in, because it would not feel as if I am in fact, you know, practicing those 3 incredibly important components that you just laid out. How can I bear witness if in fact I am just imposing my decision on what this community, what I say as an outsider, this community needs? And I find that just a replication of settler colonialism and probably what is underlying this conflict at some level to begin with.
That's fantastic, Kelly. So recall that at the front end, there was at least sufficient awareness to ask for a procedural recommendation. And what you're making a case for is actually a process that is not following those. And I think that was what was coming back. So if I heard the main things that might have eventually formed a process recommendation, the first was that local decisions should be made by people who are local. There'll be more time for that to happen if it's not to exacerbate the conflict. Don't come with a preconceived notion of how your resources might be used, but give agency to the people that are there. And we're finding some very interesting people that have capability of moving across the divides, but they'll need support. It'll be different than what you thought. So you're in a place where, it's partially the world that I live in a lot, where actually the hardest conversations are not with the local resources. It's with the overarching structures that we're embedded in and how they tend to operate, which are often short-term pre-decided and very colonial. And how and where we form part of that is such a big process of both recognizing and learning. So your point's extraordinarily well taken. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm curious, Kelly, as to your response to what John Paul said.
I think that is exactly the way in which I would personally need to feel comfortable participating, that in fact, these were localized decisions, and that there was a way in which I could be of service to the needs of community. And that's not to suggest that I might not have valuable resources, experience, or otherwise money or, structure that are colonial structures, capitalist structures that I could lend to the effort. But I think that would be the most beautiful and most important component, that those decisions do rest in community. And we are aiding and abetting those decisions.
Beautiful.
That felt good.
Roshi, you want to move on?
Should we move on, or should I add one piece to that yet, Roshi?
Add a piece, John Paul.
Well, I want to go back to the last little bit of info that came in when the Ugandan woman showed up that you had met with earlier, to our fishbowl folks, right? You were all watching. Clearly, at some point in the process, you had reached people who have that kind of quality and who are respected. Now, in her request is something similar, but it may not be as easily noticed. Coming to you as a resource, pleading that it's about to explode. So again, we're faced with something similar. So where might our thinking and questions go? So just to say that there's kind of a fractal quality to what we're talking about. And in that, just as example, what you were hinting at was we have to stay with her in the sense that she feels supported. But what are the key questions we might ask? I think among different things, the questions you were asking were spot on, which is, what does she think needs to happen? What is it she feels is going on? Because it's one woman who has appeared on our door who is connected to one group, the questions could be, do you have other women that you know from other parts? And what might be mobilized is not us stepping in order that something be mitigated, but helping to lift forward the resources and either form of accompaniment or encouragement or whatever the process would be, that from within the context, people have agency and capacity and creativity. And that's embedded in there, but it's also fractally embedded that we need help. And the typical form of help is exactly, I think, what Kelly was describing from Europe down, can also easily be replicated even in the local communities. And that's among the biggest challenges we face in a lot of peace building, is how to build the resources from the ground up and recognize those that are there. And so that in part illustrated very clearly where the early thinking that you had was going, and I thought was spot on. It would have taken longer than 5 minutes to sort that one out. But and I will say, unfortunately, when guns start shooting, it becomes very, very urgent. And the sense of harm and urgency, it's very hard to describe it unless you've been really in the middle of it, how much probably her pleading was really about, we just do not want this to go again, whatever, we have to sort this out. And that sort of can be all encompassing at that moment, most certainly. Roshi, back to you.
No, I thank you. That's very, very cogent. Did you say, or what Kelly was saying, the replication of the oppressor system, in this seeking a solution is such a common outcome. Azelle.
Hi. This brings up a really old, an experience where I was part of an international delegation during the last years of the war in El Salvador, to be a part of a celebration. It was over the Christmas holidays with the Nahuatl people. And I was maybe one of 14 or 16 people from other countries that came in to travel within the country of El Salvador to go into areas. We were going into Morazon, which was a heavily embedded with the FMLN and the army. And there was a lot of fighting, but they had been working for a year to engage with the military, and they had agreed that they would allow them to go into that area to interact with other indigenous peoples that were in that area but couldn't leave. And so we got there, we arrived after difficult travel on 4 or 5 buses, a bridge getting bombed out and having to walk across the dry riverbed. And anyway, we arrive, it's midnight, and the people who meet us is the military. And they start telling, oh, we're here to protect you, blah, blah, blah. We get situated into some rooms, sleeping on the floor all over the place. And then there's gunfire all night long. And the next morning I found out, as the chief spoke to everyone, was that it was all going one way. The FMLN was not returning fire. It was a show to look like there was conflict and we should be worried that the military is going to take care of us. And so we left. That was the decision by the indigenous chief of the Nahuatl people at the time. And the point I'm coming to is that I love some reflection on from you, John Paul, is we got back to San Salvador, met in the village of San Antonio, and it was a 3-day session to invite people from neighboring villages who had some indigenous roots, but they didn't really know about it. It was about self-determination and justice and culture. And the 3-day talk was about that. The very first day, some high-ranking military official came in, entered the circle. It was a big open circle. Again, took over. We found out there were like 15 soldiers outside with guns. And after that, no more local people came. They didn't come to attend that 3-day festival. It was too dangerous for them to do that. And that's always sat with me. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, what role did I play? I played a witness. I was there to bear witness. And there was, noticing just the breakdown and how the situation was so fraught with violence that the people in the area couldn't claim. The whole point was to celebrate the indigenous culture, but the people of the area couldn't come forward. So not that you can say how to go back and change it, but I don't know. I have not clear what the question is, but something about, is there, a way that we might have continued to reach out to the people? Or it just felt like, even now, years later, it's like 1989, it feels like such a loss that all those people weren't embraced in their culture, that they stayed out for fear. I don't know.
Roshi, are you wanting to say
No,
something?
I was thinking about you in Colombia.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, please.
Well, it's yeah. So there's a lot of pieces to your question, and let me just highlight 1 or 2 of them. One is that we live in a very imperfect world. So I've never been involved in anything that didn't require absolute constant permanence of learning. And the learning has always been best enhanced by keeping as often and as deep as possible a form of kind of radical listening, past what are the formal channels into a wider array of people who experience some part of this picture, which are often people that are quite excluded. Which means that, at least for the choices that I've made in reference to this work, longer term commitment to core relationships has been significant. And so Colombia from the late 1980s, I'm still even this week, I did a little interview with one of my dearest friends from there that I met in '88, and we've been working together ever since on the concept of accompaniment and what it meant and how we understood it. That's 35 some years. I've been arguing primarily with the world of formal professionalism, scholarship, and philanthropy that almost all of the situations wherever I've been engaged, at an extraordinarily minimum, we should be thinking in decades, not in projects, which are the typical container that people want to do things in, or in really short-term fix-it kind of approaches. I've noticed in the chat line there are some questions popping up about that. So I think that the situation that you were engaged, what is pushing on is the clarity of needing to see ways to open up more conversation with different sets of people, the time it will take to build trust in places where it's at a minimum, and the kind of ongoing commitment to stay with it if we want to think about change in the deeper patterns that keep repeating this behavior over and again and decade after decade. And those, so part of the challenge of a little exercise like today is it is highly unrealistic that this little fishbowl community, I mean, you're caught in the moment, and it's not actually going to be well handled in that moment, but it helps to illustrate where the tensions are and how we may choose to show up and how we may choose to connect the relationships that we have. Because I think one of the big challenges is to keep a sense. So the language that I use is this is particularly true of the book, The Moral Imagination, is the image of a web approach, the multiplicity of threads that are interwoven and connected. And by natural inclination, we may have access to one of those, but to keep open to the fact that there are going to be a multiplicity. But how we hold the spaces that are quite tense and increasing those that we feel we're most uniquely and best suited to follow, that's kind of a vocational question. There clearly are times where a shorter term presence can make a huge difference. I mean, the Nonviolent International Peace Force operates on the idea that the presence of a wider community in a given setting can mitigate levels of violence. So those even presence can be in that direction, but that presence may not be able in that particular form to attend to deeper pattern, which requires another, more of a systemic and relationally based understanding of it. So I think your questions are spot on. It's interesting to me that you reflect after all these years, as do I, that you experience things that you can't always even find words to wrap around it, to understand how that complexity has impacted your life. And I think that's really where a lot of this sits. A lot of it sits in kind of the world of the unspeakable. And we're trying to figure out ways to come around it. So I appreciate it very much. It was a great illustration.
Thank you, Azelle and John Paul. Helen.
Thank you so much. First of all, I'd just like to thank everyone who so creatively tackled the questions of the exercise. I really enjoyed all the input. And what I'd like to focus on are the interruptions. I really liked them, number one, because I thought that's the way life is. Things happen that don't necessarily fit the agenda. The first one triggered me because the acting mayor military commander addressed his note to the committee with "Dear Sirs." And I thought, wow, you know, it's half women, half men. And I've had that experience and felt very offended by it, to be honest. So that was number one. And then I was thrilled, really, with the third one, when the respected elderly woman from the city or town of Buganda entered the scene, because one of my first thoughts was go to the elders in these towns and talk to them and hear them out and find out what they have experienced and are thinking about the way the future could be for their communities. So I was very pleased when she entered. And then the last one, the phone call from the EU, left, the whole thing ended in a state of great tension with no resolution. And it was, again, a situation of pressure created by the leverage of money. You know, putting pressure to use the money by the end of the month, or else the whole project is off. And I was thinking, well, then, you know, you talked about shifting, and I thought, well, what is the priority here? Is it to establish the medical clinic? That's it. You know, that's why we're here and we're going to do it. Or is it a deeper or different priority, which is to build up trust? And, you know, maybe there won't be a medical clinic. Or Kelly, the first person here to enter, said maybe we'll have lots of medical clinics eventually. Maybe so, but it seems to me that the priority of trust building takes priority over even using all this money to establish a medical clinic. Anyway, that's really all I have to say, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Helen. All right. So I want to try for us to try to hear briefly from Monique, Lori, and Beth, but I also want us to stop on time. So could Monique going to essence?
Yeah, I will. First of all, thank you, Jean-Paul, for this very interesting work. But I want to share a question. I was thinking, do you address and how do you address the group processes? Because war is in essence splitting. And often you see that the group dynamic you're working with comes into the team. So there's the danger that also the team will split up and also other kinds of dynamics. So I was wondering, do you also look at the group process and the parallel between the context where you are in, and how do you do that?
Great question.
That was my question.
Great question, Monique.
Thanks.
Paul.
Should we take all the questions and then maybe
okay,
just
that's probably a good idea.
Because they might leave. That's a great question, though, Monique.
I love that question. Lori.
Hi. I actually didn't have a question. I just wanted to thank the Fishbowl team because thank you for sharing so much wisdom. And I was really drawn by the ideas of grounding. And I'm imagining for a place that's been so devastated and people have been so devastated, to be able to be with people, that have this focus on staying grounded and being able to metabolize, what has been happening, that can be a portal for trust, like just on a very human kind of a level. And something else that struck me too was the idea that just before the 12-year Civil War, there seemed to have been a time, like a golden era, or a time when they were getting along more. And that's something to, I think, have inquiry into, because, there's a connection point. There was a transmission of information and cultural and music and there's a wisdom in that too, in those traditions that are passed down, like even in millennia, and that becomes something very cellular in a people. And yeah, so
that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Beautiful. Beth, going to Essence. Hi, Beth.
Hi. I just wanted to say to John Paul that this worked online for me. And because the chances of me getting into such a situation is pretty slim, but just the overarching idea or the being dropped into a situation where I can see what might be going on was actually really, really useful. And I did, even though I'm just watching the fishbowl, I felt myself upregulate like Monica. I felt overwhelmed. I was like, too much. And I wanted to just check out. And it reminded me of your beautiful quote from one of your talks about the quality of your presence will matter more than your technical expertise in moments like these. And Monica's comment about taking a breath and, the pause was really, really useful. But I also was aware of, much like Monique, the importance of the group dynamic before you get dropped into situations like this, and also the usefulness of having very, very different people in the group. You've got Tim, the engineer, who perhaps has a better mind that works as far as keeping all the moving parts in mind and zeroing in on an opportunity when it comes to the door, or, Monica's take a deep breath, or Jennifer's let's go out into the community and just go to the pub and just get out there and be with the people who we are trying to help. So I'm not sure in a real situation whether you get the opportunity to really build the cohesiveness of the group before you get thrown into this, or how often perhaps you are, you're like, these are the people, go. So I'm curious about that with your personal expertise, and just the constant reminder of your root system analogy of how you can get distracted by the crisis when you really need to keep an eye on the big picture and the root system that is bringing these crises up like shoots all the time. So comments and thoughts for you. Thank you so much, though. It was really a beautiful and useful experience for me personally.
Thank you, Beth. John Paul.
Yeah, well, thank all of you. Maybe we'll just focus on this last little bit about the team, which came up, which had a number of people pointing to it. So there are layers to this. I'll just make a couple of essence comments, as Roshi is appealing to. The first is always work in teams. Never believe that the change at the level that we're talking about can be done as an isolated individual that somehow can handle it. So team is really significant, and teams will always have internal process that will reflect people's own strengths and weaknesses, light and shadow within that conversation. And teams are often a space where the tensions that are being experienced externally are replicated internally. The third comment is very simply that strategy-wise, in settings like these, my life work has been mostly about working with teams who are small, reflective composites of the conflict themselves. That may not sound typical to especially the mainstream mediation model, or outside in kind of a model where people assume a kind of neutrality and impartiality. From the 1980s forward, my early experience put that model on its head, and I have mostly worked with what we could reference as inside partial teams. That is, it would be in our case study here, if you could imagine that the Bugandan woman had a Kawali counterpart, and they each found 2 more grandmothers, and they represented several different villages, and the 5 or 6 of them traveled. And when they traveled, the one who was from where they were traveling to had the trust of that community, would open and hold the conversation, but others would be there to hear it. And so it's a notion of building from the resources that are within, but working with teams that often have personal connections that align them closer to one side or the other, but have a capacity to work with others who are their counterparts. That lifts forward all the more need for ongoing deep conversation about the team and how we're holding the space for each other, how we're cognizant of when we've been triggered, how our triggering can displace itself onto blame to somebody else on the team quite quickly, how small things that culturally we may not notice, but that when are spoken, impact one or another member of the team in certain ways. My use of the word sirs was very intentional. That's the structure that people in a lot of places will, especially where there's armed conflict, will tend to gravitate toward. They want the power brokers. But that's, you know, it's going to be present. That can be the same for people whose cultures have been more excluded, whose voices are more marginal, whether it's indigenous or people of color in one form or another. These are all part of that equation. So I think your questions go to the opening of the pathways toward answers. Yes, you will need to attend constantly to yourself and to the very significant people that are members of your more immediate team that you may be functioning with. And that my general tendency has been to take the time to work with and support those from within, rather than assuming that somehow the resource has to come from outside. That's not always easy in the world of donors, bilateral governments, and large-scale INGOs that to a large degree define some of the world of peace building that I live in. I say philanthropy and peace building, generally speaking, are addicted to their next fix. You can take that for what it's worth, but there's a kind of an addiction of wanting to move quickly to provide answers without investing in the deep personal and structural reflection that's needed to understand how these systems replicate themselves. And that's something that is a struggle within and outside of context where we may see the crises emergent and the greatest humanitarian need asking us for some form of accompaniment and response. Before I know you'll go back to you, Roshi, so let me just say a deep, deep thank you to all of you. I appreciate what you're doing in this space. To my fellow Goldfish members, take yourself a great ceremony of tea or something good this afternoon. I can't tell you how these little small things can trigger all of us. So it's a real lesson. Just take note of what got triggered and how we can continue to work at those edges. So deep appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you, John Paul, so much. And Diana, I see that your hand has been up. Could you just go right to essence and then have just a few housekeeping things, and then we can let this settle into us.
I see that it is 30, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. My question was very quickly for John Paul, looking back to when we were creating centers in Central and Eastern Europe just prior to them becoming no longer under communist rule. We did have a center that we put into Ukraine, and now it is probably gone. Do you know? We spent years just creating the centers.
Yeah, The communication dropped, the internet dropped just a bit for me, but I think you're referencing the investments that were made in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, when we were doing Partners for Democracy, and you're a part of our team then.
Yes, so I think there are still very significant elements of those. They are different in each of the locations, and there is a kind of a global network that that has continued to operate. The Eastern Europe was, you know, rife with opportunity and challenges, and we're still reaping some of the fact that we were not quite able to get to the level that should have happened now with, I think, this current Ukrainian crisis of how deep some of this runs. But it was, I don't know the specifics to pass it on to you immediately, but yes, there are people that I certainly have been in touch with that remain connected to that.
And
thank you.
Primarily, do you know if the one that we started in Kiev is anywhere on the ground and able to provide any services along the lines that we trained them to do?
I don't know the specifics of that answer. Yeah, in Kiev in particular. But if you're interested, maybe offline, I could try to trace down to people that might.
And just
thank you.
For perspective for everyone else, it took us years and years and years of groundwork to get these centers in place where people could get trained in conflict resolution, negotiation, and just dialogue tools to deal with the host of issues that were previously, quote, illegal in a communist society. And the fishbowl experience that we did today was such a good reminder of that. It took years to get anything in place.
Thank you, Diana. And I think that John Paul calls this the long piece. The long
That's
piece.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So my dear John Paul, our fishbowl people, our community here, I thank you so much. I'm really grateful for our wholehearted engagement. And I want to just say something very simple about the meeting with collegial stewards. You will be hearing from us shortly. The collegial group that you were in, you will continue in, but Noah's, because of his administrative responsibilities, will be, you all will find yourself in another collegial group, and the new people will be in a collegial group. And that these groups, it is really important for us to look at what are the learning points, what takeaways in terms of your world, your work, your service, your practice. What are the takeaways for you from what we've experienced today, what we've learned today? And how do you want to apply those takeaways going forward? And so the small groups are really important because they're around 20 people, and it gives us a chance to speak, all of us, more openly and also at length about the issues that we're facing in the very world and the very work that we are personally engaged in, and also to bond as a beloved community. So thank you, and you'll hear from us shortly, so you can meet with that micro community. And to know that the next micro training will be with Joanna Macy and Stephanie Kaza around the Great Turning, looking at primarily at environmental issues. So thank you everyone so much.